Australian soldiers fought their longest campaign on the dusty plains of Afghanistan. 41 were killed and hundreds wounded. Others are still living with the mental scars.
Australia, Germany and France have pledged forces as the operation unfolds.
The threat of terrorism, Mr Howard declared, would only grow if not confronted.
Special forces are not normally sent anywhere unless the objective is for them to be involved in actual operations. They are to be involved in operations as distinct from just search and rescue missions.
Over 2 decades, our combat operations were overseen by no fewer than 4 Prime Ministers on both sides of politics.
Passive indifference in the face of evil achieves absolutely nothing.
We are as determined as you are to see this mission through.
This is a bittersweet moment for Australia. Sweet because hundreds of soldiers will be home by Christmas. Bitter because not all Australian families have had their sons, fathers and partners return.
A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
20 years ago, with the World Trade Center a smoking pile of rubble, the war against the Taliban regime seemed straightforward.
We all will hope and pray it will not be long, but the reality is it could be protracted. There will inevitably be the risk of casualties.
Well, originally Australia went in to deny Afghanistan as an area where transnational terrorist groups, in this case Al-Qaeda, could plan and execute terrorist attacks against the West. That was done relatively quickly, and then the mission expanded into one of nation building to try and make Afghanistan a place where that couldn't occur again. We're 20 years down the track and it still wasn't completed.
Today, the current Prime Minister was still endorsing the task.
Freedom's always worth it, fighting for it, whatever the outcome, but importantly, the reason we went there was to track down Osama bin Laden and to ensure that we denied Al-Qaeda a base of operations out of Afghanistan.
Australia's exit strategy relies on these Afghan troops being able to run complex operations on their own.
As Australia withdrew from combat operations, its mission crept into nation building, including training the Afghan army. But the last few days have seen disturbing pictures of army units fleeing for the border and having put up little resistance to the Taliban.
And the fact that it was outnumbered the Taliban, that it was better equipped than the Taliban, but it didn't have the morale or fighting capability to defend populated centres. And that was a result of years of mismanagement, years of attrition from Taliban attacks, and it really wasn't up to it at the end of the day.
With the sudden collapse of the government in Kabul, thousands of Australian veterans who served there and the bereaved families of those who never came home can now only wonder if that cost was worthwhile.
No Australian who's ever fallen in our uniform has ever died in vain. Ever. They go and serve, and they faithfully serve, and they do it with great courage and great commitment to their country and the values that Australia represents, which is freedom.
If he can identify any freedoms that have come from this war, I'd like to know what they are.
Hugh Pote's son was killed on base by a Taliban fighter who infiltrated the Afghan army. Robert Pote had been sent to Afghanistan on what would turn out to be Australia's final mentoring task force.
We did do a lot of good things while we were there. We set up medical facilities, we set up and built schools for all Afghans, including girls, and that was a very good thing that we did. But it should have been known that the Taliban would come back with a vengeance. Schools and medical facilities that were built out in the regional areas of Afghanistan were burnt down by the Taliban because they were built by the invading infidels. You know, that in itself should have been an indication as to what was coming and what has now happened.
A former Australian commander in Afghanistan told 7:30 Today he had been watching the unfolding mess over the last few days with burning anger and dismay. What a bloody awful waste it has all been, he said. I can only imagine how the families of our dead and wounded diggers feel today. He was too distressed to talk about it on camera. Hugh Pote, who accused Defence of suppressing information about his son's killing, says Australia will need to confront its experience at war with clear eyes.
If you don't disclose the facts, lessons cannot be learned.
In such a messy conflict over 2 decades, Australia's impact can perhaps best be analysed through the lens of our localised involvement in the province of Uruzgan, north of Kandahar.
When Australia deploys troops in a large coalition campaign, the Australian troops are just looking after their little patch and trying to do the best they can for their little piece of the overall pie. I think Australia and the Australian troops did well in Uruzgan, but that was just one part of a much broader Afghan campaign. And all you could do as a soldier was look after that area that had been allocated to you.
That area, like the rest of the country, is under Taliban control now. Although for some, the absence of Taliban rule for the intervening period was an objective worth fighting for in itself. The question of whether the Taliban receives international recognition is a much more significant one than just a diplomatic nicety.
The Taliban want legitimacy. It gives them a seat at the table. This idea of international legitimacy and recognition is something that the West could withhold from them until they're satisfied that their rule is not resulting in the persecution of minorities and the persecution of women.
But this is of little comfort to the terrified Afghans who wait to see what will happen next, as we saw in the awful scenes coming out of Kabul today. And it does not answer the question of why we have once again been so slow to help the many Afghans who assisted our troops.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.